Hi, my name's Marcy, and at 2 in the morning, I learned what family really meant. My stepfather lunged at me with a screwdriver, my blood soaking through my shirt, and my mother's only words were, "Don't be dramatic." That's the moment something in me died, right before something else woke up. They thought I'd call a friend for sympathy. I sent an SOS instead, one that brought the federal government to our doorstep. But here's the thing. How did a family that smiled for every Christmas photo end up surrounded by flashing lights at 2 a.m.? And why did my mother fight harder to protect his reputation than my life? When I drove back into Knoxville, the spring air was heavy with that mix of honeysuckle and cut grass that always makes people think of home. But home had changed for me too much. The little white house on Sycamore Lane still looked the same from the outside. Trimmed hedges, wind chime by the porch, a flag that my stepfather, Vernon, hung up every Memorial Day. To anyone else, it would have looked peaceful. To me, it felt like a place where I was returning as a guest, not a daughter. I parked at the curb and sat for a moment, letting the hum of the engine fade. My chest tightened the way it always did before seeing my mother. We hadn't spoken much since my divorce, just the occasional text, short, polite, "I hope you're okay." The truth was, I wasn't. The job I thought I had lined up after the divorce fell through, the apartment lease expired, and the bank balance shrank faster than I could manage. Going back home wasn't pride, it was survival. When I knocked, the door opened only halfway. My mother's face appeared through the crack, makeup done, hair curled like she was expecting a guest she needed to impress. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her voice floating somewhere between sympathy and annoyance. "You made it. The traffic wasn't too bad, I hope." She hugged me quickly, a kind of press and release that didn't linger. Vernon was in the living room, his feet propped on the coffee table, remote in hand. The television volume stayed loud enough to drown out any warmth in the air. "Hey," he said without looking up. "Heard you're back for a bit?" A bit. That was the word. Temporary, like I was a project to be managed. Mom led me to the couch near the downstairs bathroom. "We haven't used the guest room in ages," she said lightly. "You'll be comfortable here." The couch smelled faintly of cleaning spray and mildew. Beside it, the hallway light flickered every few seconds. From where I stood, I could see the bathroom door. It creaked every time someone used it. I forced a smile. "It's fine, Mom. Thank you for letting me stay." She exhaled in relief. "Good. I knew you'd understand." That first night, I unpacked one suitcase and placed it by the couch. Each sound in the house was louder than I remembered. The bathroom fan, Vernon's laugh from the TV, my mother's footsteps moving in controlled rhythm above me. I tried to picture the home I grew up in, but all I saw was this version, one where I didn't quite fit anymore. The next morning, sunlight spilled in through the small window by the stairs. The smell of bacon drifted from the kitchen. I followed it, brushing my hair back, pretending to belong. Vernon sat at the head of a table, newspaper spread open. My mother hummed as she flipped pancakes. "Morning," I said softly. She smiled without turning. "You slept well." "As well as one can when the bathroom door creaks all night," I joked. Vernon chuckled. "Maybe you should fix it then. Give you something useful to do." Mom laughed with him, a quick nervous sound. "He's teasing, honey. Don't be so sensitive." I poured coffee and sat down, letting the silence do its work. The air was filled with that fragile peace that families pretend is love. By afternoon, Mom was already talking about her book club, Vernon about the neighbor's new truck, and me. Well, I was mostly invisible. When I mentioned applying for nonprofit positions, Mom's eyes brightened politely. "Oh, that's nice. Just make sure it's something stable this time," she said, cutting her pancakes into perfect squares. I hesitated. "It was stable, Mom. The project funding just shifted. It happens." Vernon leaned back. "Maybe don't try saving the world next time. Just get a job that pays." My mother smiled at him like he'd said something wise. "He's right, dear. You always want to do everything the hard way." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, not exactly. It was dismissive, the kind that erases you one chuckle at a time. Dinner came that evening with the same routine. Television murmuring in the background, silverware clinking, my mother asking about my brother's promotion. Calder, the golden child, had just been named assistant branch manager at the bank. Vernon slapped the table proudly. That boy's going places. Knows what stability looks like. My mother nodded, eyes shining. He takes after you. Then she turned to me, her smile soft but distant. So, any luck with those applications? Not yet. I have a few interviews scheduled next week. That's good, she said, cutting me off before I could explain further. You'll get there. Just keep your expectations realistic. I swallowed the bitterness, along with a sip of lukewarm water. It's not about expectations, Mom. It's about... Honey, she interrupted, tilting her head. Just eat and be nice. Let's not make this about you. Vernon chuckled again. There she goes, getting all fired up. My fork clattered softly against the plate. The air around me thinned. The conversation drifted back to Calder's success, the new barbecue grill Vernon wanted, the neighbor's dog. I chewed mechanically, nodding when required. The table felt smaller, like I was eating in the corner of someone else's life. After dinner, I helped clear the table while Mom washed dishes. She spoke without looking at me. I know you're under stress, sweetie, but try not to take things so personally. We all want peace in the house. Peace, I repeated quietly, stacking plates. Right. When the kitchen was spotless, I slipped away, avoiding Vernon's eyes on the couch. The evening dragged into night. Upstairs, laughter from the TV seeped through the ceiling. I lay on my side on the downstairs sofa, scrolling through job emails that all said the same thing. We regret to inform you. Each rejection felt like confirmation of what this house whispered: failure, disappointment, burden. Around midnight, the pipes rattled, followed by the flush of the toilet. The fan roared to life again. I stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds between sounds. The thin blanket itched against my skin. From the hallway, I heard footsteps. My mother's silhouette paused near the doorway. We're all adjusting, she said softly. Don't take everything so personally, okay? I pretended to be asleep. After a moment, her shadow moved away, the light fading behind her. The hum of the ceiling fan filled the silence. I turned toward the wall, biting the inside of my cheek to keep quiet. There was a time when her words might have comforted me, when we actually meant something. But lying there, I realized that we no longer included me. The air smelled faintly of bleach and something older, like the memory of a home that used to feel safe. My eyes stayed open long after the lights upstairs went out. The walls seemed to press closer, the thin fabric of the couch digging into my shoulder. I tried to slow my breathing, to steady myself, but the ache in my chest only grew. Somewhere above me, the house sighed, a groan of it settling, or maybe of people pretending everything was fine. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dark, "This isn't home anymore." I spent the next few days trying to convince myself I belonged there. I helped around the house, ran errands for my mother, folded laundry that wasn't mine. She thanked me once or twice in that distracted tone people use when they're already thinking of something else. Vernon mostly ignored me, except for an occasional grunt or comment about how much water I was using in the shower. The air in that house carried a quiet rhythm of exclusion. It wasn't open hostility, just a steady reminder that my presence required adjustment. One quiet afternoon, while my mother was at her book club and Vernon had driven to the hardware store, I decided to make myself useful. The basement had always been a mess, and I thought maybe organizing it would show some gratitude, or at least buy me a little goodwill. I found an old sweatshirt and went downstairs with a broom and a half-dead flashlight. The smell of dust and damp cardboard hit me first. Light from the tiny window near the ceiling cut across the room in thin stripes, highlighting the shapes of stacked boxes and forgotten furniture. I moved one pile to the side and found my old bicycle frame, rusted, the training wheels still attached. Next to it was a box that made my heart stumble, my name written across the front in my mother's looping handwriting. It read, "Old Junk Toss." I crouched beside it, brushing off the dust. My hands shook as I pulled back the flaps. Inside were pieces of my childhood, the teddy bear I used to sleep with, ribbons from school spelling bees, a few photos from summer camp. Everything had that faint smell of attic and paper. At the bottom, I found a birthday card I'd made for Mom when I was 9. The crayon hearts had faded, but her name was still in the middle. To Mom, love, Marcy. The sight of it made something inside me twist. I looked around and noticed other boxes, stacked neatly nearby. Each had labels written with more care. Calder, Keep safe. Family photos, Vernon's tools. Mine was the only one marked for disposal. I sat down on the cold floor and stared at the handwriting. Toss. Not give away. Not store. Not even sort. Just toss. My chest felt heavy, not from shock but from confirmation. The truth was there in black ink. I was temporary here, even in memory. Hours must have passed because when I looked up, light had faded into the dim yellow of the basement bulb. I repacked the box carefully, sealing it the way you might seal a wound you can't fix. When I came upstairs, the sound of music drifted from the kitchen. I followed it, confused. Streamers hung from the doorway. Balloons in shades of blue were tied to the chairs. My mother was standing on a stool, adjusting a banner that read Happy Birthday Calder. Vernon stood beside her, lighting candles on a cake. I stopped at the threshold. No one had mentioned a birthday. I'd been living here for nearly 2 weeks, and not one word. Mom turned and smiled like she'd just seen me wandering in from outside. "Oh, honey," she said cheerfully, "you startled me. It's just a small dinner for your brother. He's bringing a few friends over. You don't mind, do you?" "Mind?" I asked quietly. I didn't even know it was happening. She laughed, the kind of laugh that dismissed rather than explained. "Oh, I must have forgotten to tell you. We didn't want to make you uncomfortable. Calder's friends can be loud." I stood there, trying to find words that wouldn't sound bitter. Vernon looked up from the cake. "You can join us if you want, but it might be awkward. Everyone knows you've had a rough time. Might be better to rest downstairs." The humiliation burned through my throat before I could swallow it down. "Sure," I said. "Wouldn't want to ruin the mood." I spent the evening in the basement, the faint thump of music traveling through the floorboards. Each laugh, each cheer for another round of beer sounded like a knock from a world I wasn't invited to anymore. I tried to distract myself by sorting old boxes, but my eyes kept going back to the one labeled old junk. At some point, the party ended. The music died. I heard the door close, then silence. When I finally went upstairs, the kitchen was a mess of paper plates, crumbs, and half-empty bottles. On the counter sat the leftover cake. Happy Birthday smeared into something unreadable. My mother was washing dishes, her back to me. "You didn't come up," she said without turning around. "I wasn't invited." "Oh, don't be dramatic," she replied, rinsing a glass. "We just didn't want you to feel out of place. You've been so tense lately." I looked at the sink, at the foam swirling down the drain. "Out of place. That's accurate." She sighed. "Please don't start, Marcy. Tonight was for Calder. Can't we have one evening without tension?" I wanted to ask her how she defined tension, if being invisible counted, but the words stayed trapped behind my teeth. I simply nodded, picked up a plate, and started helping her clean. After the kitchen was spotless, I went back downstairs. The basement felt colder that night. I switched on the small lamp beside the old workbench and sat on the floor next to the box again. Inside, I found one more thing I hadn't noticed earlier, a folded drawing. It was a picture of my family, Mom, Vernon, Calder, standing in front of the house. The lawn was green, the sky bright blue. There was no trace of me anywhere. I must have drawn it when I was 9, around the same time as that birthday card. Maybe I'd already learned where I stood even then. I stared at it for a long time before laughing quietly. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind that slips out when you recognize something too cruel to cry over yet. Tears followed anyway, blurring the paper until the crayons bled together. I pulled out my journal, one of the few things I'd kept close since moving back. The pen hovered above the page before I finally wrote, "I'm invisible here." They didn't just forget me. They want to forget me. The words looked small in the light, but they felt like truth. I closed the journal and set it on top of the box. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked, probably Mom moving around, making sure everything looked perfect again for tomorrow. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and whispered into the dim room, "You already got what you wanted, Mom. Peace." The next time I cried, it wasn't over a drawing or a memory. It was over blood running down my shoulder, while my mother stood there telling me I was being dramatic. The basement still smelled like dust and quiet neglect when I woke up that night. The air was heavy, and somewhere above me a clock ticked through the dark. I didn't know what had woken me at first. Maybe the television, maybe the sound of Vernon's voice carrying through the house. He had that kind of voice, deep and jagged, that could slice through any silence. It was past 2. I checked my phone, its blue light making the room look even smaller. I heard the television again, the faint drone of some old war documentary. He always watched those late at night, especially after a few drinks. The sound of gunfire and cheering soldiers echoed through the vents. I lay there for a while, trying to ignore it, counting my breaths like that would make me calm. But the volume kept climbing, the narrator's voice growing sharper, until I could hear every line. I sat up, wrapped my blanket around my shoulders, and walked toward the stairs. The living room glowed in the light of a television. Vernon sat slouched in his recliner, a beer can balanced on his knee. He didn't look at me when I stepped into the room. The floor creaked, and he grunted. "Could you turn it down a little?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "It's really loud." He didn't move. The sound of machine guns filled the room. After a beat, he said, "No one's stopping you from leaving if you can't sleep." I felt that familiar sting, the one that came every time he reminded me I wasn't really wanted there. "It's still my mother's house, too," I said quietly. That made him laugh, a dry, mean sound. "Your mother's house? I've paid this mortgage for 15 years. You've been here, what? 2 weeks. You think that counts?" I looked toward the kitchen, trying to decide if this was worth it. "I didn't come here to argue, Vernon. I just need some rest." He slammed the cabinet door behind him, so hard the sound bounced off the walls. The beer can fell, spilling across the floor. "You think this house is a hotel? You think you can waltz in, act all superior like we owe you?" I took a step back, my heartbeat picking up. "You're drunk," I said. "Don't you tell me what I am." He pointed at me, his finger trembling. "You're a leech. Always have been. You use people, then play the victim when it doesn't go your way." I folded my arms, not because I was brave, but because I needed to hide the shaking. "I've paid my way all my life. You know nothing about me." He stepped closer, the smell of alcohol sharp and bitter between us. "You want to know what I know? You manipulate your mother. You stir up trouble. You don't belong here." I turned toward the hallway. "I'm not doing this," I muttered. "I'm done talking. Don't walk away from me." His voice cracked like thunder. I didn't turn back. My hand reached for the stair rail, but before I could take another step, there was a scrape behind me, the sound of metal sliding from a drawer. When I turned, Vernon was holding a screwdriver. His eyes were glassy wild. For a split second, I thought it was some twisted joke. "You're not serious," I whispered. He lunged. The motion was so fast I didn't have time to think. The metal caught my shoulder, a sharp, burning pain that spread through my arm. I stumbled backward, the world narrowing to the sound of my breath. I fell against the wall, my knees hitting the floor hard. The screwdriver clattered somewhere near the counter. I pressed my hand to the wound, and it came away warm and wet. "You," my voice broke. "What did you just do?" Vernon's face shifted from anger to something almost blank. "You should have known when to shut your mouth," he said flatly. I tried to stand, but the room tilted. My body felt heavy, uncooperative. I saw him grab a towel, toss it toward me like that would make everything better. "Clean yourself up before your mother sees. You always blow things out of proportion." I don't remember the next few seconds, clearly. The sound of my heartbeat filled my ears, drowning out everything else. Then I heard footsteps, my mother's voice, hurried, worried, calling from the hallway. "What happened? What's going on?" She appeared in the doorway, her face pale under the kitchen light. When she saw the blood on my arm, her hands flew to her mouth. But instead of running to help me, she turned on me with that same practiced exasperation. "What did you say to him?" she demanded. I blinked, barely processing. "What?" "You know how he gets when you push him," she said, stepping closer to Vernon, not to me. "Why can't you just stop provoking him?" "Mom, I'm bleeding," I said. The words felt heavy, slow. She shook her head. "You always make things bigger than they are. You twist everything into drama." Vernon didn't mean it. Vernon stood there, silent, arms crossed. The towel he'd thrown landed in a heap near my feet. For a moment, I thought maybe I was dreaming. That's how unreal it felt, watching my mother comfort the man who just hurt me, her voice soft, her hand on his arm. "Go upstairs," she told me. "We'll handle this in the morning." I pressed my palm harder against my shoulder, feeling the pulse beneath my skin. My body trembled from shock or anger or both. "You'll handle it," I said. "He stabbed me." "Enough," she snapped. "Lower your voice. The neighbors might hear." Something inside me went still then, like a switch flipped. I looked at her and saw the truth I hadn't wanted to face. She wasn't going to protect me. Not tonight, not ever. Vernon muttered something about teaching respect and walked past us toward the stairs. My mother followed him halfway before turning back. Her face was tired, her voice softer now, as if she was the one who'd been wronged. "Go clean yourself up, Marcy. Please, let's not make a scene." The pain in my shoulder pulsed with every beat of my heart. I stumbled toward the sink, grabbed a dish towel, pressed it against the wound. The water from the tap hissed, and for a second I thought about screaming, loud enough for the whole street to hear. But I didn't. I stood there in the dim light, my reflection in the kitchen window barely recognizable. My eyes were glassy wide but dry. Outside, the street was quiet, moonlight spilling across the porch where the flag still hung from the pole. Everything looked normal from the outside. I wanted to laugh at that, the image of normalcy we'd always maintained. The neat house, the smiling Christmas cards, the polite conversations at church. None of it was real. I leaned against the counter, breathing through the pain. My mother came back briefly, her robe tied tight around her waist. "We'll figure this out tomorrow," she said. "Just go to bed." I turned to her. "You saw what he did." Her eyes flicked to the blood, then away. "You need to stop exaggerating, Marcy. I know you're under pressure, but—" I cut her off. "You're unbelievable." She frowned. "Don't talk to me like that. You're scaring me." I almost laughed again, but my throat burned too much. "You're scared," I whispered. "I'm the one bleeding." She took a step back, clutching her robe tighter. "You're just tired. Let's not make it worse." Then she left the room. When the house fell silent again, I sank to the floor. The towel was cold under my knees, the towel warm with blood. Every instinct told me to get out, to run, but something stronger, a quiet clarity, told me to stay still and think. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I reached for my phone with my good hand, opened the emergency contact app, one hadn't used since my nonprofit days, and typed 3 letters. SOS. The moment my thumb pressed send, the phone screen dimmed, and the house seemed to grow quieter. The air felt dense, thick with the scent of stale beer and fear. I could hear Vernon moving somewhere down the hall, his boots dragging against the wood floor, muttering words I couldn't make out. I leaned my head back against the door, keeping my hand pressed tightly against the wound on my shoulder. Every heartbeat sent a small pulse of heat through the towel I'd wrapped around it. I needed to lock the door before he realized where I'd gone. My fingers trembled as I turned the lock. The soft click sounded louder than it should have, like a gunshot in that silence. He paused in the hallway. "Marcy!" he called. His voice had that slick, artificial calm that only drunk men use when they know they've gone too far. "Come on, I didn't mean to scare you. It's over. You're fine." I stayed still, breathing through my teeth, praying he wouldn't try the handle. For a long second, the silence stretched. Then his tone shifted, hard again. "You better not be calling anyone. Don't make this worse." His footsteps faded, then came back, pacing in circles. I sat down on the edge of the bed, trying to focus on the small blue light of my phone. The encrypted app one used back when I worked with the field response team wasn't meant for personal emergencies, but I still remember the procedure. SOS automatically sent my coordinates, along with a silent distress code, to the Federal Threat Network. It was a system designed for employees in danger overseas, not women bleeding in their own bedrooms. Still, it was the only thing I had. The message showed signal sent. That was all. I waited for the confirmation. Outside my room, the television clicked on again, loud as ever. He was pretending nothing had happened. That was his way, rewrite the story before anyone could question it. I leaned my forehead against the cool paint of the wall, my thoughts looping back to my mother. She hadn't even checked on me since she left the kitchen. My arm throbbed. I tried to steady my breathing and whisper to myself, "You'll regret the silence, Mom." The seconds blurred into minutes. Every creak of the house made my heart jump. From downstairs came the sound of my mother's voice, soft, cautious. "Marcy, are you awake?" I didn't answer. "Marcy, honey, don't make a scene," she said, her tone the same one she used when I was 10 and spilled juice on the carpet. "We'll talk in the morning. Just rest. Talk in the morning." That phrase had become her anthem, the way she postponed reality whenever it grew inconvenient. I stared at the blood on the towel, darker now, sticky and metallic. There wouldn't be a morning talk this time. I opened my phone again, checking the screen every few seconds. Finally, it vibrated. Signal received. Federal response team en route. I exhaled, not relief, not yet, but control. I wasn't safe, but I wasn't helpless either. Downstairs, Vernon cracked open another beer. I could hear the hiss of carbonation, the scrape of the can against the table. He turned the TV volume even higher, maybe to drown out his own conscience. My mother's voice came again, muffled by walls. "You need to apologize to her in the morning," she said. He barked a laugh. "She's the one who should be apologizing." A door slammed. Then silence. I sat there counting my breaths until the sound of tires crunching gravel reached my ears. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the mind's way of creating hope where there was none. But the low hum of engines grew louder, then multiplied. I stood, clutching the towel tighter against my shoulder, and moved to the window. Flashing red and blue lights reflected off the glass, painting the walls in streaks of color. I could hear the metallic clank of car doors and the low murmur of radios. A beam of light swept across the front yard. Someone shouted a command I couldn't make out. Vernon must have noticed too, because the television suddenly went silent. I heard him stomp toward the front door. My mother's voice followed, high-pitched and panicked. "What's happening? Vernon, what did you do?" He swung open the door. The noise from outside flooded in. Helicopter blades chopping the air above, men shouting instructions, a neighbor's dog barking hysterically. "This is a misunderstanding," my mother cried out. "Please, whatever this is, it's a mistake." I opened my bedroom door. The hallway smelled like cigarette smoke and bleach. Vernon stood in the entryway, frozen under the porch light, hands raised halfway as uniformed officers approached. The sight was almost surreal. His arrogance drained from him like air from a punctured tire. "Sir," one officer said, "step away from the house." He sputtered, pointing behind him. "It's her." She overreacted. "It's nothing, just a family argument." I stepped into view. My mother turned toward me, eyes wide. "Marcy, please," she said, voice cracking. "Tell them it was an accident." I walked slowly down the stairs, each step measured, steady. The towel at my shoulder had turned almost brown, my arm aching from holding it in place. I didn't look at Vernon or my mother. I looked at the officer instead. "She's lying," Vernon snapped, but his voice faltered as he saw my face. The officer's eyes dropped to my shoulder, to the dark stain spreading through the fabric. "Ma'am," he said gently, "we need to get you medical attention." Delphina moved toward me, reaching out as if to hush me. "Marcy, stop this," she whispered. "Don't ruin everything." I took a step back. My voice came out steady, clearer than I expected. "This is what happens when you hurt people and expect them to stay quiet." She froze. For once, she had no practiced line, no gentle correction ready. Her mouth opened, then closed again. The officers guided Vernon toward the waiting cars. He didn't resist, just muttered under his breath, "She's crazy." "They'll see that." Flashing lights reflected in my mother's eyes as she stood at the door, clutching her robe like it could protect her from shame. I stood there, barefoot on the cold tile, breathing evenly for the first time in hours. The night outside was filled with sound, radios, barking dogs, the hum of engines, but inside it was completely still. One officer approached me. "We've got a medical unit on the way. Sit down if you can." I nodded, lowering myself onto the bottom step. The adrenaline started to wear off, and the ache in my shoulder sharpened into something heavier. My vision swam, but I didn't faint. I didn't want to give them that image, to see me broken. Through the open door, I caught a glimpse of the neighbors gathered on their lawns, their faces ghostly in the red and blue light. I wondered what story they'd tell tomorrow. Probably something about the family on Sycamore Lane, the one no one really knew but always suspected wasn't as perfect as they looked. The paramedics arrived a few minutes later. They lifted my arm gently, asked questions in calm, clipped tones. I answered what I could. My mother hovered nearby, wringing her hands. It was an accident, she kept saying. It was all just misunderstood. The paramedic ignored her, focused on me. You're lucky, he said quietly. It missed the artery. Lucky. That word sat strange in my chest. As they wheeled me toward the ambulance, I caught my mother's gaze one last time. Her face was pale, her lips trembling, not from fear for me, but fear of what people would say. The doors closed, and the noise outside dulled to a hum. Inside the ambulance, the air smelled sterile, metallic. The medic checked my pulse and scribbled notes. I turned my head toward the window. The house looked small now, fragile under the pulsing lights. A neat suburban home full of ghosts pretending to be a family. I realized I didn't belong there, not anymore. Maybe I never had. As we drove away, the siren flickered but didn't wail. I stared at the rising sun beginning to tint the edge of the sky and thought, they'll never understand that silence can scream louder than any cry for help. By the time we reached the hospital, dawn had started to bleed through the clouds. By morning, I was in a hospital bed, and my mother still found a way to make it about her. The room smelled like disinfectant and burned coffee. I woke to the soft hiss of the oxygen vent above me, the steady beep of a heart monitor keeping time with the ache in my shoulder. The light through the blinds was thin and gray, the kind that doesn't promise a real sunrise. I turned my head slowly and saw her sitting there, my mother, Dell, perched on the vinyl chair beside my bed, her hands folded like she was waiting for applause. "Oh, thank God you're awake," she said softly, her voice coated in relief, the kind she performed best. She leaned forward, squeezing my hand. "You gave us such a scare." I blinked at her. My throat felt dry, and when I spoke, my voice came out rough. "Us." Before she could answer, a nurse entered the room. The woman was in her 50s, competent and tired, her badge swinging with each step. "Good morning, sweetheart. How's the pain?" she asked, adjusting the 4-line. "It's fine," I whispered, though it wasn't. My mother smiled sweetly at the nurse, her tone immediately brightening, too bright. "It was such a terrible accident," she said. "My husband feels awful. She must have tripped over the toolbox. It happened so fast." The nurse's hands paused midair. Her eyes flicked to me, then back to my mother. "A toolbox?" "Yes," Dell continued, placing a hand over her chest. "She's always been so independent. Stubborn, you know. I told her not to clean up so late, but she never listens." The nurse didn't respond. She finished checking my vitals, nodded, and left. The door clicked shut behind her. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, thick enough to choke on. My mother sat back down, brushing a stray hair behind her ear, her expression calm, polished. I stared at her, trying to recognize the woman in front of me. "You're unbelievable," I said finally. Her eyebrows lifted just slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You turned it into a story," I said. "You're standing in a hospital room lying to strangers like it's Sunday brunch." She sighed, like a teacher disappointed by a student. "Marcy, please. You don't understand how serious this could get. The neighbors saw the lights, the police cars. Vernon could lose his pension over this. We have to control the narrative." "The narrative," I repeated quietly. "You mean the truth." "Don't be dramatic," she snapped, the sweetness cracking. "You made a mess. I'm trying to protect everyone. Everyone but me." Her face hardened. "You always twist things. You've done it your whole life. If you could just control your emotions, maybe people would stop thinking you're unstable." That word, unstable, landed harder than the wound in my shoulder. I turned my face toward the window, the blinds cutting the sunlight into narrow lines across the bed. "You're right," I said. "I can't control what you call emotion anymore." She didn't respond. The chair creaked when she stood. "You should rest," she said finally, her tone returning to that measured calm she used when she decided a conversation was over. "I'll check in later." When she left, the room exhaled. I could still smell her perfume, powdery, familiar, and suffocating. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of hospital life. Carts rolling, voices calling codes I didn't understand, the rhythmic pulse of machines. The day drifted slowly. Nurses came and went, checking monitors, changing bandages. One of them, a younger woman with kind eyes, asked if I needed to call someone. I told her I already had. She smiled and didn't press. By evening, the light outside turned a soft orange. I was half asleep when I heard the click of the door. My mother was back, carrying a cup of coffee in her oversized purse. She sat down without a word, scrolling through her phone. "How's Vernon?" I asked after a while. "Exhausted," she said, not looking up. "He's been answering questions all day." "You really embarrassed him, Marcy." "I embarrassed him?" "Don't start." She rubbed her temples. "You don't understand what stress does to people. He lost his temper, and now he's the villain. He's not a bad man." I laughed once, softly. "He stabbed me, Mom." She flinched, then lowered her voice. "Keep your voice down. The walls are thin. I'm not the one who should be whispering." She stood abruptly. "You're impossible." She picked up her purse, muttering under her breath. "I'm going to grab something from the cafeteria." When she left, I sank back against the pillows. The ache in my shoulder pulsed with my heartbeat. I closed my eyes, willing myself to sleep, but it wouldn't come. The silence stretched again. Then, a faint sound interrupted it. A soft chime, the kind that comes when Bluetooth connects. I frowned, sitting up slightly. My earbuds were still in my tote bag on the bedside table. My mother's phone must have auto-paired with them when she walked in. I hesitated, then unzipped the bag, just enough to pull the small device closer. Her phone buzzed once. A call connected. Vernon's voice came through, low and slurred with exhaustion, or maybe whiskey. "If she disappears, we'll finally have peace in this house." My heart stopped for a beat. "Don't say that," my mother hissed quickly. "Not on the phone." He laughed softly. "You know I don't mean." The line cut out. I sat there, staring at nothing, my hand trembling slightly. My ears rang in the silence that followed. There was no misunderstanding, no twisted phrasing to hide behind this time. They wanted me gone. Whether gone meant moved out, or buried didn't matter, the intent was the same. I took a deep breath, forcing my body to stop shaking. Then I pulled the earbuds from my bag and disconnected them. My thumb hovered over the phone screen. I deleted the call record and turned off the Bluetooth. The screen went black, reflecting my own face, pale, tired, eyes steady. For the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid. Just clear. Cold. They'd built a story where I was the problem. But I still had the truth, and I still knew how to use it. The nurse returned to check my vitals. She smiled faintly when she saw I was awake. "You're healing fast," she said. "Yeah," I replied quietly. "I always do." She left again, closing the door softly behind her. I leaned back, the beeping of the heart monitor steady and calm. My mother's purse sat where she'd left it, the faint scent of her perfume still clinging to it. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I already had what I needed. The night outside the window deepened to indigo. I whispered into the quiet, almost like a promise. "You'll never erase me again." When I finally slept, I dreamed of a house without doors, one where no one could shut me out again. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds. I woke to an empty chair where my mother had been, a coffee cup still half full beside it. The room felt cleaner somehow, lighter, as if it had exhaled too. A nurse came in holding an envelope. "This was dropped off for you early this morning," she said. I took it. On the front, my name had been written in my mother's neat handwriting, then scratched out. When I got home 2 days after being discharged, the house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that hums under the skin, like a warning. A vase of half-dead flowers sat on the counter, wilted from neglect, and the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old secrets. My mother wasn't there to greet me. Neither was Vernon. I had the spare key, the same one I used as a teenager when I'd sneak in after curfew, back when this house still felt like a place that belonged to me. I set my small overnight bag down and poured a glass of water. The bandage under my shirt pulled tight when I lifted my arm. The doctor said I was lucky. The blade had missed the artery by less than an inch. I didn't feel lucky. I felt hollow. That's when I saw the letter on the kitchen counter. It was addressed to my mother, the envelope torn open but left carelessly behind. The return address belonged to a law firm downtown, the kind that handles old money and polished lies. Out of habit, I stacked the mail neatly, but when the corner of one page slipped free, I caught a glimpse of my own name. Not printed, scratched out. Something inside me stilled. I slid the papers out. It was a revised will. My mother's handwriting scrawled across the margin with tiny notes, corrections, initials. My name appeared once in the middle of the page beside the line "For Beneficiary," then blacked over with thick pen strokes, pressed so hard the paper nearly tore. Beneath it, the estate was divided between Vernon and Calder. I stared at the page for a long time before I realized I wasn't breathing. The glass of water trembled in my hand as I set it down. It made a hollow sound on the counter, the kind that echoes too long in an empty room. I folded the will carefully and walked down the hallway toward her study. The door was half open. My mother was at her desk, her favorite teacup beside her, the faint sound of classical music playing from a small radio. She looked peaceful, content, almost saintly in the soft afternoon light. I stood in the doorway for a few seconds before speaking. "Did you mean to leave this out for me to find?" She didn't turn around. "What are you talking about, dear?" "The will." That made her pause. Her hand tightened slightly around the teacup before she set it down with deliberate grace. "Oh," she said, still not looking at me. "You saw that?" "Yes," I said, stepping inside. "I saw my name, or what's left of it." Finally, she looked up. Her expression was calm, almost kind. "We didn't think you'd want the burden of the house anyway. You've always been so independent, free-spirited." "The burden," I said. My voice came out sharper than I meant. "You mean the place I grew up in? The place I just got stabbed in?" She frowned slightly, as if I'd committed a social misstep. "You're still holding on to that?" "Marcy, that was an accident. Don't let one mistake define everything." "One mistake," I repeated quietly. I held up the paper, pointing to the scratched-out line. "You erased me. With a pen. That's not an accident." She exhaled through her nose, slow and measured. "Don't dramatize this. It's just a house." There it was again, her favorite word. Dramatize. The all-purpose weapon she used to cut me down without ever raising her voice. I nodded slowly. "You're right. It's just a house. But I did want to know I mattered." The silence that followed was long and unbearable. She reached for her tea again, pretending to sip. "You always take things so personally," she said softly. "You don't understand what it's like to keep a family together. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made." "And I'm the sacrifice," I said. "Don't be childish." I laughed under my breath, but there was no humor in it. I folded the papers, tucked them under my arm, and walked toward the door. As I turned the handle, she said almost gently, "You know if you just let things go, you'd be happier." I didn't answer. I just walked away. That night, after the lights in her bedroom went out and the house finally fell into the stillness it always pretended was peace, I opened my laptop. The blue light from the screen illuminated the small scar on my shoulder through the bandage. I ignored the sting and searched my files until I found a folder buried beneath layers of decoys. I'd named a contingency a long time ago, back when I still thought someday I might need proof. Inside were voice recordings, her condescending tones, Vernon's shouting fits, moments that seemed small at the time but painted a picture no one could deny. There were photographs of bruises, receipts, timelines. I had even saved copies of text messages, apologies that meant nothing, excuses that tried to rewrite every wrong into misunderstanding. There was also a draft of a letter from my old therapist, half-written and unsent. In it, she detailed patterns of manipulation and emotional suppression within the client's family system. I remembered the day she'd asked if I wanted her to file it officially. I'd said no. I didn't want to start a war back then. Now I was ready for one. I opened a blank document and began typing, listing events, dates, times. Every instance where my mother had chosen image over truth. Every moment Vernon's temper had turned violent while she looked away. My fingers moved with calm precision, not rage. Rage was noisy. This was quiet, controlled. The moonlight shifted across the floor as the hours passed. The sound of the keyboard became its own heartbeat. I wasn't writing for revenge. I was building something solid, something that couldn't be erased with ink or denial. I stopped only once, when the pain in my shoulder flared. I pressed a hand over the bandage and whispered to the empty room, "You can scratch out a name, but you can't delete a witness." Outside, The neighborhood was silent, the streetlights painting long shadows across the windows. I wondered what the neighbors thought had happened that night. Maybe they'd stopped wondering altogether. By 3 a.m., the document was nearly complete. I saved it twice, once to a secure drive, once to the cloud. Then I leaned back and stared at the screen. That was when I heard it. A soft rustle from the hallway. A piece of paper sliding under the door. I froze. The envelope lay there, pale against the hardwood floor, my name typed neatly on the front. I stared at it for a full minute before picking it up. The seal had already been broken, like someone wanted to make sure I'd see inside. The first page began with legal language I recognized instantly. Notice of pending order. My eyes traced the signature line at the bottom. Delphina Moss. For a long moment, all I could do was sit there, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. I didn't open the second page. I didn't have to. Whatever it was, she'd made her move first. I closed the laptop slowly and whispered to no one. So this is how it's going to be. The lamp flickered once, then steadied. I slipped the envelope into the same folder with the rest of the evidence. Tomorrow, I decide how to use it. But tonight, I let the quiet have me. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, formal, the kind you don't get unless it's meant to make you feel small. I hadn't even heard the knock. It was just there, slid under my door, waiting like a quiet threat. I stood over it for a full minute before picking it up. My hands didn't shake. Not yet. Back at the kitchen table, I opened it with a paring knife. One swift slice through the seal, one shallow breath. The words hit fast. Temporary restraining order. Filed by Delphina Moss. Cause: unpredictable behavior. Emotional instability. Risk to household safety. I stared at the page. The ink didn't blur, but everything else did. I flipped to the second sheet. An affidavit. In my mother's script. It detailed my history of erratic behavior, my volatile emotional state, and her concerns that Marcy may be a danger to herself or others. I read it again, then again. She'd used every vulnerable thing I'd ever told her: panic attacks in college, therapy sessions after the divorce, one night I couldn't sleep and called her crying. Each one transformed into evidence against me. She didn't even bother to soften it. I walked to her study. The lights were on. She was at her desk, organizing a stack of note cards like nothing had happened. When I stepped inside, she didn't look up. "You used my panic attacks against me?" I asked. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. She placed one card on top of the pile and finally turned toward me. "I told the truth," she said evenly. "You need help, Marcy. Not a podium. Not attention." "I didn't write it for attention," I replied. "I wrote it to survive." "You signed away your daughter to protect the man who stabbed her," I said. "That got her." She stood up quickly, her hands gripping the back of the chair. "Don't twist this. You don't understand the pressure we're under. This neighborhood, Vernon's job, the people who know us." "The people who know us," I interrupted. "They don't know me. They know your version of me." She crossed her arms, looking away. "I won't let you ruin this family's name. Then you shouldn't have given it to a man who left me bleeding on the kitchen floor." That stopped her cold. For a moment, neither of us moved. She stared out the window, lips pressed thin, the muscles in her jaw tight. "Get out of my office," she said finally. I did. That night, I opened my laptop again. My document was still there, glowing on the screen like a lighthouse in a fog of lies. I hadn't touched it since adding the legal file earlier that morning, but now, my fingers hovered over the keyboard. I didn't know if I had the strength to finish it, not after this. I checked my email. A new message sat at the top of the inbox, subject line, regarding your submission. It was from the editor of Voices Unseen, the survivor-focused nonprofit blog I'd submitted my essay to last week. I opened it. "Marcy, we deeply appreciate your bravery and honesty. Unfortunately, we've received a legal notice from a representative of your family, alleging defamation and reputational harm. Due to the legal risks involved, we are unable to publish your piece at this time. Please know this is not a reflection on the value of your story, but a precaution for our organization." Below that, a scanned letter on legal letterhead, signed by my mother. I stared at the screen, letting the quiet outrage settle into place. She was erasing me in real time. First from the will, now from my own story. I stood, ripped the printed draft of my story from the wall where I'd pinned it, and tore it down the center. Then again, and again, pages fluttered to the floor like wounded birds. But as I watched the paper fall, something shifted. I knelt down, picked up the pieces and smoothed them out, taped them back together, piece by jagged piece. By the time the sun cracked across the blinds, the tape was in place, and the story was reborn under a new name. A new byline, one no one in this house could threaten. I changed a few identifying details, altered the timeline slightly, removed all names. But the core remained. The truth remained. It was no longer about them. It was about me. I opened a new tab and went to Whispers from the Wounds, a lesser-known but respected survivor-led publication that accepted anonymous stories. I pasted the text in, checked it twice, then once more, and just as I hit send, there was a knock at the front door. I froze. My phone buzzed a second later with a text from an unknown number. Federal office. Urgent follow-up from recent case. Please open door. I walked to the foyer, still barefoot, still half-healed. The morning light made everything look too normal. I opened the door. A federal officer stood there, plain clothes, holding a small flash drive in one hand and a printed transcript in the other. His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. Miss Moss, he said, we received new evidence last night. A child submitted it. You're going to want to see this. The officer's voice was even, but the weight of his words hung in the room like smoke. I opened the door wider and stepped back without saying a word. He walked in, calm and deliberate, the kind of man trained to stay neutral no matter what's unfolding in front of him. He held up the flash drive. This came in through our digital tip line last night, he said. We reviewed it and expedited it to the emergency docket. You're going to want your attorney to see it before tomorrow. I took the drive from him, my fingers brushing the cool plastic. Who sent it? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out a printed sheet and handed it to me. A transcript. Short. Just a few lines. She's bleeding. Why is no one helping her? Nolai Trask, age 11. My knees nearly gave out. I had to brace myself against the wall. Nolai. The quiet kid next door. Always drawing chalk suns on the sidewalk, always watching with those wide eyes, as if taking inventory of every adult lie unfolding around her. She recorded it from her bedroom window, the officer added. We're confirming the metadata, but based on our review and the timestamp, it's very likely admissible. I nodded slowly. We'll see you in the hearing room at 9 a.m., he said, then turned and left. I didn't sit down. I walked straight to the laptop on the kitchen table, the one still open from the night before, and inserted the flash drive. It loaded fast. One file. One video. I pressed play. The screen showed my front yard from a distance, dark, grainy, the kitchen light glowing from the side of the house. Inside, shadows moved. You couldn't see faces clearly, but the voices, clear as glass. Vernon's angry yelling. The crash. The moment I stumbled back, screaming. My body collapsing against the wall. Then Delphina's voice, sharp and clipped. Don't overreact, Marcy. And finally, that small, trembling voice, Noli's, whispering from behind the phone mic, she's bleeding. Why is no one helping her? I covered my mouth with both hands, my shoulders shaking. But I didn't cry from sadness. I cried because someone saw. Someone believed me without needing explanation or polish. I copied the video file to 3 separate locations, one on the cloud, one on a portable drive, and one on a burner email address I hadn't used in years. Then I called my attorney. By mid-morning, I was sitting in a cold federal hearing room, everything about it designed to feel sterile and intimidating. The air smelled like toner and floor wax. Delphina sat 3 rows behind Vernon, her eyes downcast, hands clutched around her purse like it held the last of her power. Vernon looked tired, but still smug, still acting like this was all beneath him. The judge was a woman in her 60s, salt and pepper hair pulled back, her expression unreadable. She flipped through the file in front of her, then looked up. Let's proceed with the supplemental evidence. My attorney stood, inserted the flash drive into the court's display system, and the video played. The room was silent. No coughs, no chair squeaking, No whispers. The only sound was Vernon's voice on tape, followed by Dell's. Then that soft, unmistakable sentence from No Lie. Delphina went pale. She reached for her mouth, but too late, the damage was done. The judge sat very still for a moment, then folded her hands. "Miss Moss," she said, addressing my mother, "would you like to clarify your affidavit, in which you claimed there was no credible witness to the event?" Dell didn't answer. Her voice caught in her throat. The judge turned to Vernon. "Mr. Creed, you are hereby remanded to federal custody on charges of aggravated assault with intent, based on corroborated visual evidence. Bail is denied." Vernon's mouth fell open. "This is ridiculous. It was just a family argument." "Sir, this court does not define stabbing someone in the shoulder as a family argument." He stood up, but the bailiff was already moving. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed like punctuation. Dell started to cry, silent tears, no sobs, just the quiet kind of breakdown that only happens when an image finally shatters. Then the judge turned to me. "Miss Marcy Moss," she said, her voice gentler, "you were never dramatic. You were in danger. This court formally vacates the restraining order filed against you. You are free to pursue full recourse, both civil and criminal, should you choose." I nodded. I couldn't speak. My throat was too tight. Afterward, as people shuffled out of the room, my mother approached. Slowly, carefully. "Marcy," she whispered. "Please." I didn't know what he'd do. I was scared. I looked at her, really looked at her. The trembling lip, the perfectly ironed blouse, the hand still clutched like she could pray this away. "You were scared," I said softly. "Then you should have stood with me, not against me." She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came. She stepped back and disappeared into the crowd. My attorney patted my shoulder gently. "You did it." But I didn't feel victorious, just steady, for the first time in a long time. Outside, the sun was blinding. A few reporters hovered near the entrance, but I kept walking. I didn't know them anything. Across the street, I saw a small figure standing near a bus stop. No lie. Her mom beside her, hand on her shoulder. Our eyes met. She gave me a little wave. I smiled and nodded back, pressing my palm over my heart. Justice gave me closure, but healing still had to be earned, one truth at a time. The court ruling came and went, but the aftershocks lingered in quieter places, moments you don't expect. Like the silence in your car after you turn off the ignition, or the way your own voice sounds strange when you answer the phone. 3 weeks had passed. The community center where I now worked was a modest brick building tucked between an abandoned pharmacy and a daycare. The kind of place most people drove past without noticing. Inside, it smelled of old carpet and too much coffee, and it buzzed with quiet purpose. This morning, I sat in my small office, hunched over a keyboard, finishing the final edits of a blog post. "You're not crazy. They just needed you quiet." The title sat bold at the top of the page. No name beneath it. Just the piece. Just the truth. It wasn't the same essay my mother had gotten pulled. That one was personal, visceral, angry. This one was colder, steadier. It told the story in strokes that didn't need names. The readers didn't need to know Vernon's last name or which street the ambulance parked on. They'd lived versions of it themselves. I clicked publish. The page refreshed. The post went live. For a few minutes, I just sat there, breathing, letting the weight of it settle. Then the notifications began, comments trickling in one by one. I thought I was the only one. "Thank you. You put words to what I couldn't say. I've never told anyone what happened to me until now." I leaned back and let the quiet cover me like a blanket. That's when a knock came at my door. Not a loud one. Gentle, but with purpose. I opened it and found the same federal officer who'd handed me the flash drive weeks earlier. He offered a slight smile. "Sorry to drop in unannounced." I stepped aside, gesturing him in. "No problem. Everything okay?" He nodded. "More than okay. I just thought you'd want to know something." He didn't sit. He stood near the window, arms crossed loosely, his gaze distant. "We reopened some files after your case closed. Vernon wasn't the first. 2 other women had reported incidents, one in 2016, one in 2019. Both of their cases were shelved. Not enough evidence. No support system. No one believed them. I felt a slow, hollow ache spread through my chest. Why now? He looked at me. Because you never stopped documenting. You brought the receipts. You broke the pattern. I nodded once, words caught behind my teeth. They're watching now, he added. The department. The judges. They'll think twice next time someone says, she's just being dramatic. He left a card on the desk and let himself out. I didn't move for a long time. Just sat there with that card in front of me. A name, a title, a badge number, but more than that, a line in the sand that someone else had finally drawn. That afternoon, the mail arrived in a rubber-banded stack. Most of it was junk. One letter stood out, my mother's handwriting on the envelope. I knew it before I opened it. Inside, her note was long, handwritten in blue ink, slanted to the right, her usual loops and flourishes intact. We were scared. I didn't know how to help you. Vernon wasn't always like that. Excuses dressed up as empathy. Phrases that danced around responsibility. Not once did she say, I'm sorry. Not once did she say, I was wrong. I folded the letter neatly, slid it into a plain envelope, and wrote one word across the front in block letters, unfinished. Then I tucked it into a drawer beside my desk and shut it without a sound. By evening, the sun spilled across the concrete floor of the community center, casting long orange lines across the walls. Our support group met in the back room every Tuesday. We sat in a loose circle, women of all ages, backgrounds, experiences. Some still fresh from trauma, others carrying decades of pain in their eyes. I listened more than I spoke. That was the job now, not to center myself, but to open space for others. At the end of the session, I passed around notebooks. Write something you needed to hear back then, I said. Something you can give to someone else now. I watched them write. One woman scribbled furiously. Another paused, thinking. A third just held the pen and let herself breathe. Later, I walked home under a sky full of stars, the kind that only show up after something has burned clean. I wasn't whole. I wasn't healed. Not in the way people wanted to hear in a final chapter. But I was rebuilding, and that was enough. Some nights, I still dreamed of a house. But in the dreams, I was packing, not running. Gathering only what mattered, leaving the rest behind. Before bed, I opened my journal and wrote the last entry I would ever dedicate to my mother. The wound is healing, but I'll carry the scar like armor, for every woman still waiting to be believed. I closed the book, because when they called me dramatic, I answered with evidence. When they called me broken, I walked away whole. What this story reminds us is simple. Silence doesn't equal safety. Sometimes, the most dangerous place isn't out in the world, but behind the very doors we call home. If you've ever been called too emotional or dramatic just for standing up for yourself, maybe it's time we start asking, who benefits from your silence? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more true stories that hit deep, don't forget to like,